When you enter a new phase in your life, the next step in your evolution, I believe that your soul calls in a group of people who are experiencing some of the same challenges to help you in your own journey. And then you guys kind of form a collective to help each other out. And it's almost like you kind of come up together in the work that you do. Like, you were there for each other, like the early days of all the struggles and the challenges. And then you get to a point where you also see some of the successes and it continues to grow. It's like a spiritual cohort, I like to describe it as. And I really believe that Cho Hwang of Astro Forecast is one of the people in my cohort. She and I, both have corporate backgrounds and we started our businesses roughly at the same time. We both have Asian backgrounds, and I think something that we both share that we're working towards is less of the masculine, more of the feminine, really leaning into our intuition and knowing that practical is not always the answer and the best way to do things. And the lessons that we're learning is more about finding flow, finding more space, more expansion in our everyday lives and how we see the world and how we grow our business. And with Cho, she was also on season 1, and you guys may know her better as Astro Forecast. In this specific episode, we're talking about the lessons of Saturn. So, not just what a Saturn return is like the first time when it happens in your late 20s, but what does it mean in your mid to late 50s when it comes back around again a second time? And just, generally, what you're meant to be learning from Saturn, because each of us have a specific Saturn placement. And those are the things that are the hard lessons that we have to learn. And anytime you kind of identify or feel some friction in your life, it's very helpful and powerful to go back to your birth chart and to see, hey, my Saturn is in Aries. Like, what does that mean? My Saturn is Sagittarius. And use it as a guide, as a compass, as you navigate a kind of murky time in your life. So, Cho and I talk about obviously her Saturn return, and she's an astrologist, an amazing astrologist. And so we really get into defining like Saturn and astrology, how it's helpful for personal development and all of that. So I hope you enjoy this. And we also talk about our backgrounds of being women of color, from Asian culture and all that. You guys know I love talking about that because there are not a lot of us in the wellness space and in these more liminal parts of wellness, the esoteric, the mystical. And it's important for us to connect and to lift each other. And, because I have a podcast, to amplify these voices. Hi, Cho. I am so excited to welcome you to the second season of Into the Woo. I found you a year and a half ago on TikTok. You were on the first season as well. I mean, I love the practical ways you share about astrology. Your community, Lunar Mission Club, is amazing. And I think that was a pretty good introduction, but I will let Astro Forecast explain a little bit more about herself and her business.
Thank you, Alice. Thank you for the amazing introduction. And yes, I am an astrologer who specializes in predictive forecasting. And I really love connecting with you because I feel like we share a lot of earth placements, which is very practical, like can-do energy. And so I really love connecting with you on that. But I love to share the magic of astrology with everyone to help them see their own inner power, connect to their higher selves, and to really manifest everything they want in their life. So excited to talk more about that today.
Oh, yes. Okay, let's just get right to it. Saturn return. What is Saturn return? I'm asking you this question because you're an astrologist. So getting your hot take on it is going to be great.
Saturn return, such a pivotal turning point in everyone's life. So the first way to understand Saturn return is to know that it is a life cycle event that happens to everyone. So every single person on this planet will go through a Saturn return, and it happens in 30-year cycles. So every 30 years, you have a new Saturn return, and that is the time when we are challenged and we are empowered to learn all the lessons of Saturn. Now, to understand the return on a deeper level, you really need to understand the archetype of Saturn itself. Just to quickly go over that, Saturn is a serious planet. Saturn is the planet of responsibility, maturity, discipline, and also with that comes challenges, restrictions, limitations. And so we have to understand that Saturn return is a time when we are called on to become more Saturn, become more responsible, become more mature, become more focused, more consistent, more disciplined in the things that we need to do in our lives. And the promise of a Saturn return is that if we are willing to put in that work, then we get back the effort that we put in so we can gain greater success, greater achievements. Saturn does represent a public figure, an authority figure. So it is really a time when we can unlock the purpose, the achievement that we're here to leave on this earth. But so often, we don't grow without challenges. And so Saturn is here to bring those challenges.
I know these challenges well, Cho, because Capricorn is my stellium.
Yes.
Saturn rules my chart, everyone.
Wow. So you are someone who is likely to feel Saturn very strongly, and the returns may even affect you more than, other people.
I feel like it's always Saturn return for me.
You're living in perpetual Saturn return.
Yeah, I feel like my friend Nikki Novo also feels the same. It's like we're like in our minds, we're like, okay, when is it gonna feel easy? No, it's never gonna feel easy.
Wow. And do you have Saturn in Capricorn as well?
No, my Saturn is in Sagittarius.
Oh, okay, gotcha. So you were right on the edge. Yes, I know you were born in the late 80s. So a lot of people, late 80s to early 90s, they have Saturn in Capricorn, but before that was Sagittarius.
So it's something that I always like go back to and like investigate and look at. And what I've actually found when I do my career clarity readings is that some people, and I want your opinion on this, some people, they don't experience like a life altering Saturn return. Some people just coast through it. It's with certain placements that now, of course, I like forget about. But what would happen? Like what's in someone's chart that would give them kind of like a free pass for Saturn return?
Well, that's a good question because I don't know if anyone gets a free pass necessarily, but Saturn return, I would say, is still one of those times where you really need to take time to do deep self-reflection and introspection because you may not connect certain dots unless you can kind of like get away from the external chatter to quiet down to what you feel like is truly happening for you and your life. Oftentimes these can be subconscious though. We have shifts in perspective or mindset, or we finally realize we're ready to let go of this ex or this bad hookup, whatever it is. But I think taking time for reflection does help you connect the dots of Saturn more because at the end of the day, Saturn is really kind of the archetype of, well, he represents father time. So he keeps time for you. And when time is up, Saturn is here to look back at what you've done to make sure you're on track, basically. So the first Saturn return, you will face challenges that kind of force you to say, have I been building a good foundation in relationships or career or health, whatever it might be. And if you haven't been, then you may find that, certain limitations come up to force you to look at those. But with that, if you have been actively, proactively working to build a solid foundation and to do things more responsibly, then you will actually have an easier time with Saturn return because you've already learned all those lessons.
I was straight up in denial.
Yes.
I knew that I like wanted to do something different, but of course, oblivious me. Sometimes I'm oblivious. I'm like, oh, I don't really think it's entrepreneurship, but I keep on coming back to entrepreneurship and wanting to have more freedom in the work that I do. And I'm like, no.
Not be tied down. Yeah. And that's, I feel like tied to our cultural heritage as well, being Asian and born from, I had quite traditional parents who thought the lawyer job, the doctor job, that's what I was supposed to be doing. And so I feel like from that background, you can definitely have a closed off sense of the view of the world, which Saturn is here to expand.
Yeah, I think if you have immigrant parents or you come from a background or a family that's like, you should really only do this, these kind of like belief systems take a long time to chip away. And that's what I was really doing, getting comfortable with risk, being uncomfortable and uncertainty. And so,
Wow.
yeah, it took a while, but here I am.
Yeah. Oh, I also love that. I feel like that is a perfect manifestation of your Sagittarius, actually, because Sagittarius is all about being willing to take those risks and like kind of push yourself to see what is beyond or what are new possibilities. So yeah, I feel like that was a core part of your journey.
Oh my God, it's all the mind, all the stuff in the mind, very philosophical about like,
Hmm.
what is and what isn't, and like learning things
Exactly.
and
Greater
teaching
meaning.
things.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. But you know, a lot of people only talk about the first Saturn return,
Mm,
but I have a lot of clients that are going through the second Saturn return, which
that's a really good question.
I actually find to be really juicy
Mm,
because you can look back on how you
hmm.
felt during the first one.
Hmm.
And then the second one, I feel like it's almost like, are you thriving?
Hmm.
Are
Hmm.
you living a life that you're like really happy? Like that first one is like foundational. And it's like, okay, kind of steering you, are you aware of your purpose? But the second
Hmm.
one seems like, have you been honoring that purpose or have you been letting
Mm.
it fall like by the wayside? What do you feel like the differences are? And then like the third one, I'm like, I don't know. I don't want to go through
At
like
that point, you're just getting
the
kind of,
third one, and you guys in the 80s, I'm not keen about. I'm like,
yeah,
I'm not trying to be
I'm just trying to chill.
working. Yeah.
I think you're totally right because the first Saturn return kind of shakes us up to connect to our purpose. And then the second one is like, have you been taking the steps towards that? Have you been doing what you said you're going to do? Have you been holding up your end of the bargain after we, kind of make the first agreement the first time around? But with that, yeah, I would love to hear your clients' take on the second return because honestly, I haven't had many clients in that age range. But I would say the
Mm,
for my clients who are going through their first Saturn return, because it's so much about like connecting to your purpose and what you really want to do, I find that it often is manifesting through questions about career
yes.
and whether they want to, yeah, quit their job or find a new job or start their own business, whatever it might be. But I do feel like the second Saturn return it can still tie to business, but it might have less of a focus on that and more about, where are you in terms of are you at the place in the world that you want to be, whether that is
Yeah.
through your career or through your like community efforts, that
Yes.
can look many different ways. I also find that the second Saturn return people tend to focus on their parents actually, because
Mm,
Saturn does represent your parental figures, and so if they might be in a position where they're learning to take responsibility for their parents and the roles are shifting, things like that.
no. So the clients that I've had that are going through their second Saturn return, which is in your like mid to late 50s,
Mm-hmm.
they are the ones that's an important time because when you think about it, that's when people do like kind of big career pivots.
Mm.
And that's when they have like midlife crises.
Mm-hmm.
Like
Mm-hmm.
that's when people lose their shit. If they didn't lose it the first time, it was definitely the second time when they're just like,
Yeah.
I don't know what's happening. And that's when most people have money
Mm,
and they've been
exactly.
comfortable for a while. So that's why they like blow things up. And then they're like, oh,
Yeah.
maybe I didn't need to like blow those things up. Maybe if I just went to therapy and was like not
Yeah.
in denial and ignoring things, and
Yeah.
that it would have been a
No,
lot
I
better.
totally agree. And that's like the key theme with all Saturn returns is that you need to take responsibility for yourself. So if there's been things you've been repressing or ignoring or like psychological issues you haven't been addressing, like those things come up during any and all Saturn returns.
A lot of moms, a lot
Mm-hmm.
of women, they're
Mm,
just like, I want to go back to work, but I feel kind of
mm.
weird and I don't want to
Yep.
go. I mean, the workplace has changed. Some of it's still the
Yep.
same, but it's changed so drastically. But I find some of those clients, they're very hesitant to go back into a patriarchal, like
Mm.
male oriented, like toxic environment.
Exactly. But they have to understand that Saturn return is also a beautiful time of rebirth, honestly. And so this is the time to kind of build their new future. Saturn has a lot of themes about like building a foundation, like building the house you want, like metaphorically. And so they should take this opportunity because if you put in the work during a Saturn return, it's like a promise that you will get back reap the rewards of your work after the next couple of years.
Yes, completely. Okay. What was your Saturn return like? And your Saturn placement is interesting.
Yes, mine is in Capricorn. So, like I was saying, a lot of people born in the early 90s, we have Saturn in Capricorn. And for all of us, we went through it, I would say between late 2017 to late 2020 was when Saturn was back in Capricorn. So, it kind of spanned like those 3 year periods. But because Saturn was in Capricorn for us, Capricorn is a sign that rules career and rules work and rules job. So, I feel like a lot of us kind of like early millennials are questioning our relationship to business, our relationship to work, whether we want to have that like 9 to 5 or whether we want to be more independent. And a lot, yeah, I went through a lot of change around that. But from my Saturn return, I really feel like I kind of went from the caterpillar to the butterfly, like a metamorphosis type of energy. Because at the beginning of my Saturn return, I was really anxious, I was really depressed, I was sad, I was scared. And by the end of it, I had found my spiritual calling, I had found a higher sense of purpose, I quit my job that I hated. So it really was a transformation from the inside out.
For myself, it was the same as well. For me, I was already an entrepreneur, but then I went back to work for like a startup. And I think at the tail end of it, I really stepped into my own power, kind of like that first phase, that first layer of like, I can do something by myself, and really going out there and being like, okay, I'm going to start this company that I feel like is a little strange, but I'm really excited about it. So that's what happened for me. And I felt like my Saturn return lasted for a long time because there was that pre-period, and then there was the post-period.
Oh, interesting. And you, again, being Saturn ruled, probably feel it very strongly.
Yes. So for anyone out there who's like, this feels like really long.
Yeah.
It's normal.
Take heart. And the thing with Saturn is like, again, it rules time. And so it tends to bring delays or things taking longer than you expect. And part of that slowdown is, again, to kind of push you to build a really strong foundation rather than taking shortcuts.
And what were some of the most important lessons you learned during your Saturn return?
Yeah, that's a good question. I keep going back to the themes of like responsibility, maturities, because a big part of it was taking responsibility for my problems and not blaming other people for them, and also not seeking solutions from other people as well, because I had to figure out like my own strength in resolving those things. And with that, I feel like Saturn return also showed me that I have what it takes to do even bigger things. Like I didn't have the ability to, be public or speak in front of people, but Saturn return showed me that. So I feel like some of the big things I started doing practically was going to therapy was a thing I started like in the beginning of my Saturn return, because I had just gone through some shit before, and really taking responsibility that like no one is gonna, help me with my mental health. Like it is something I need to proactively work through. So going to therapy. Other routines, I would say setting up routines is really important. So I did start meditating and praying early on. Now, this was before I really had my spiritual awakening, which happened later on in my Saturn return. But at that point, I was still like kind of confused, like called myself an atheist, like didn't really know what there was beyond, beyond this physical world. But I just knew that I was being pulled in certain directions. So I started meditating, and I also started allowing myself to think like, what if there is something beyond? Like, what if these synchronicities are not coincidence? What if there is, actual like guidance being given to us? So really embracing certain ways that I can make myself feel better. And with that, I do find that I got new challenges thrown my way, especially during work, actually, because maybe my Saturn's in Capricorn. But at work, I started having a lot more responsibilities of things to do. I specifically got asked to do a lot of public speaking engagements, which at the time I was so afraid to do. But I feel like those were, again, some of the obstacles, challenges put in place so that I can overcome them and show myself that I have what it takes. And so embracing new like roadblocks, obstacles, and showing yourself that you can achieve them was a big part of like what I went through, at least.
Yes, absolutely. And you had mentioned a couple things that helped you through the process, meditation, prayer. Was there anything else? Like, also therapy?
Yeah. I would say the big thing.
Astrology. It was it was astrology.
Well, astrology came later. I found astrology through my Saturn return, actually. But I would say the first things like I talked about was therapy, kind of really facing my shadows, because I had for years kind of like repressed them or left them not spoken about.
To fester.
And so I feel like, exactly, festered and kind of just like pretended everything was fine when the house was burning. But exactly. So facing my fears was the big one, I feel like, in terms of what helped me through the process, like being honest that like I have these feelings and I should not ignore them and tell myself everything is fine. I remember even like one day, because I was really afraid of death, actually. That was one of my biggest fears. And one day I literally took the time to write down every single way I could die, which was really morbid and kind of really scary too. But through that process, you realize like okay, like I can't do anything about a car crash, let's say, but I can be healthier. I can exercise. I can do all these things. So showing me like what I do have and don't have control over, but facing my fears, getting into a routine of self care. And with that, it really couldn't have happened unless I was then allowing myself to believe that I was being guided. Like, even though I didn't know anything about spirituality or even about astrology at the time, like I allowed myself to believe that I was being guided by my grandmother who had passed away, like other relatives who, I connected with them first before other spiritual energy. But through that process, it really helped me think about like, okay, then what do I want to learn about? Like if I don't like my job and if I don't like my standing in life, like what do I actually want to learn next? And that's when astrology came in towards the end of my Saturn return. I started getting really interested in studying. And from that, kind of took it off from there.
Yeah, I just find that sometimes people think that astrology is just the horoscopes, aka like the
Mm.
sun signs, and everybody knows about like Mercury retrograde.
Yep. It's happening soon.
Oh, I mean, it's been happening. It's like the pre-shadow period has been so bad. It's like, wow,
Yeah, exactly. Perpetual retrograde.
perpetual retrograde or an extended retrograde. But people don't realize that astrology really can be anything you need it and want it to be. First and foremost, it's a tool for self-reflection. It's to be mindful of how you show up in the world and how
Mm-hmm.
you can be more authentically you. But it's kind of like maybe you need to figure out like where you're lucky.
Exactly. I really just call it a blueprint of our soul, because it's kind of like if we had a guide on how to live life in the best way, wouldn't you take that guide? And I see our birth chart as that guide, and it can tell you areas of life where you have strength, areas of life where you may need to work more on, which typically tends to be where your Saturn is, areas of life where you can expect challenges. And that's the best part about astrology is that it can confirm what we're already feeling. Like it can
Yes.
confirm that we're in a Saturn return, which means we should expect delays, obstacles, limitations. And the best part is it also tells you when it might end when Saturn leaves that house and that sign. So it's really just a guiding tool to help us listen to our intuition better. And again, it just confirms what we're already feeling.
And it's not just the birth chart where the celestial bodies are at the time of birth, but
Mm-hmm.
you can look at your chart
Mm-hmm.
every single year, every
Mm-hmm.
single day to see like how you are feeling. I mean, that's like advanced. You have to like really learn because I think it'd be pretty difficult for you to talk to an astrologist like every single day. I mean, you could, I guess, put an astrologist like on retainer monthly or like daily or weekly, but it tells you kind of like why you might be feeling a little bit weird. Maybe you're feeling more emotional or you're feeling like, oh, I'm like ready to do work and create something new.
Mm-hmm.
That's the part that oftentimes isn't spoken about. And I know you focus on predictive astrology.
Yes, exactly. That's really what got me into doing this more seriously was the forecasting, the predictive bit, because it doesn't just tell you, about your life in general, but how you can actuate on your life to really make the most of the energies going on right now. So yeah, forecasting can tell you your current challenge at the moment, the area that you have luck at the moment, the things you might be needing to do to, have better achievements in your career or relationships or whatnot. But yeah, people don't realize that astrology is very vast and very complex and nuanced. And even I can't say that I know all of it, but it can guide us in so many ways.
Yes. And it's not just for people who are in the wellness world, people like
Mm.
you and I, but more and more people are coming to us to learn about these things, learn about themselves, and they have very typical jobs, like corporate jobs.
Hmm.
And you see that in your community, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's not just about like the tarot readers or the astrologers, but people who are just wanting to live a more intuitive approach to life and feeling like they are more in connection to their soul than to what society may have to say. And so, yeah, I definitely feel like astrology becoming more mainstream to me is just part of this collective shift towards a more emotional, intuitive led lifestyle where we realize that certain structures like capitalism are not really serving us anymore. And we can live more fulfilling lives when we listen to ourselves. And astrology is just one of the many ways to do that.
I'd love to know what you learned in this episode. And if you're going through a Saturn return, what support do you need? And what has it been like for you? Has it been kind of like a bit of a soul wrenching experience and you kind of having so many existential questions? Or have you been coasting through it because you've already been on your path, which big kudos to you. Now, these episodes about Saturn return aren't just for people who are going through their Saturn return, which happens in your late 20s, mid to late 50s, as well as mid to late 80s. It's really a source of inspiration for people who are trying to just make a change in their lives, wanting to do something different, but afraid of taking the leap. I know that for myself, whenever I'm going through a big transition, it's so helpful to hear the stories of other people because I'm like, they made it through, I can make it through as well. And they also have wonderful tips and tricks of kind of like, what do they do to kind of get through this kind of rocky time? So I hope that it's been inspirational to you. And if you think that someone would benefit from this episode, share it with them. And if you haven't rated the podcast 5 stars, I would be so appreciative if you rated it 5 stars. And if you feel compelled to make a donation, you can find that in the show notes as well. Your support means so much to me. If you're interested in spirituality and how that helps with building a business and figuring out your career, don't miss the next episode that's dropping same time next week. All right, have a wonderful day. And as always, I am wishing you so much joy and so much abundance in your life.